very honored to introduce to you the Swedish Minister for Foreign Affairs, Margot Wallström, who has put sustainability and human rights, not the least the rights of girls and women, at the heart of foreign policy. Please welcome Minister Wallström.
Good morning and welcome to Sweden, Excellencies, Ministers, distinguished guests, dear friends. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here today, taking part in the World Water Week and being given the opportunity to speak about the role of water in sustainable growth and also give you some overview of how Sweden is working with the 2030 agenda. And first of all, thank you to the Stockholm International Water Institute for organizing this important event during the past 26 years. I was born in the north of Sweden, and I think today we can say that your destiny is also our destiny, like never before. And it is clear how water is the symbol for all of this, and not only the symbol, but the true way to measure how we are interdependent. And I think it is also clear from looking at water scarcity or water problems, how climate change is something that will not happen in the future and to somebody else, but affects all of us and already. And I was thinking that in this country of a lot of water, snow and ice, it is actually in the eternal life cycle of water. It is the same water that I can drink from a small ice-cold river in the north of Sweden, the same water that I can drink from my cupped hands as has rained down on a forest in South America, been carried in clay vessels over deserts in the Middle East, that actually filled the bathtub of Cleopatra, passed through a cooling system of a nuclear power plant, evaporated into the clouds during El Niño to hopefully wet not only Stockholm, but also some beautiful islands in the Pacific. The same water in the eternal life cycle of water. And I think it also shows the responsibility that we carry both as individuals, as political leaders, as actors in our different capacities, and I think you represent all of that at the same time. The theme water and sustainable growth has high relevance and clear links to the implementation of the 2030 agenda and for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And sustainable growth requires sustainable development, stability, peace, healthy environment, gender equality, and economic growth, etc. Our world today is characterized by conflict, climate change, extremism, and inequality. The humanitarian needs seems infinite, and we are witnessing the largest number of refugees since the end of Second World War. And at the same time, the World Economic Forum in the Global Risk Report has identified water as one of the main challenges worldwide. The water crisis and climate change are closely interlinked, and the impact of global climate change is clearly visible in the water resources and poses a serious risk to poverty reduction and threatens to undo decades of development efforts. Millions of people are living in regions with water scarcity, and at the same time, a warming planet is increasing the stress on these regions. And I saw it myself visiting small island states in the Pacific and elsewhere. The world's population continues to grow, which means also increasing demands for water to produce food and for other purposes as household needs, sanitation, industrial and energy production, etc. Armed conflict is many times the reason for a lack of access to clean drinking water and sanitation. So peace and stable development are generally requirements for attaining clean water and sanitation. Climate change also constitutes a threat to global security, as it can be a catalyst for increased tension that could lead to conflicts and poverty. That means increasing competition for scarce water resources. You know this better than others. Shared waters and joint management of the transboundary water resources can, however, also be an important unifying factor, contributing to dialogue, peace, regional and political stability, and economic growth, as we saw the example from the water heroes. And it is important to balance a rather dark and gloomy picture of today's world with also giving those examples and discussing, as you will do during the Water Week, what can be done, what is possible to do, how can we contribute. We also know that climate change and lack of basic resources strike disproportionately at the most vulnerable and poor people of the world. It adversely affects security in fragile settings where governance is weak and institutional capacity to deal with shocks and crises is low. We've seen this in Syria, Mali, Sudan, Somalia, and in other many places. Some of the most obvious effects of climate change have direct links to water: droughts, wildfires, storms, floods, ocean acidification, and sea level rise all have devastating effects for life and economic development. Sea level rise can lead to salt polluting fisheries, agriculture, and not least the freshwater supply. And it was again, as an example, the small island states where the tuna fishing has already been reduced, and they want to replace it with tourism, but the tourists cannot find fresh drinking water. This becomes a vicious cycle, economic cycle, and of course hampers development in these parts of the world. It's important to remember that oceans and coasts partially support about 75% of the global population residing in the wider coastal margins. Access to water, sanitation, and hygiene has a direct impact on the health of women and girls. For example, the lack of adequate sanitation and menstrual hygiene facilities at schools and workplaces often leads to absenteeism or dropping out. In many parts of the world, access to a toilet is a matter of security for women and girls. Access to water significantly reduces women's and girls' workload and the amount of time they spend on arduous tasks such as fetching water. It can free up time for market-based activities and enable them to attend school. But the women and girls in the world still experience gender inequality, lack of rights, representation, and resources. In many families, girls under the age of 15 are twice as likely as boys to be the family member responsible for fetching water. Women's economic empowerment is not only a prerequisite for the realization of gender equality, it is also a prerequisite for economic growth, for reducing the number of people living in poverty, and to more peaceful and prosperous societies. There are some similarities between water and economy. Water starts its existence as rainfall, later creates streams and rivers, forms lakes, and finally turns into the oceans. And the economy works in a somewhat similar way. The flow of activities of individuals, both men and women, enables the economy to grow. Successful realization of Goal 6 of the 2030 Agenda will underpin progress across many of the other goals, particularly on nutrition, child health, education, gender equality, healthy cities and healthy water ecosystems, and oceans. 2015 was an important year for global governance, with worldwide agreements on poverty reduction, disaster risk reduction, development financing, and climate change. We now have the comprehensive normative frameworks needed to support sustainable development and peace. The implementation of the 2030 Agenda is a shared responsibility of all countries. Its comprehensive approach involves all actors in the society. And Sweden is actively working with the implementation of the 2030 Agenda, and this work is intimately linked to the Development Financing Agenda, Addis Ababa Action Agenda, and the Policy for Global Development, which is the Swedish version of Policy Coherent for Development. This connection is central to the implementation and should be seen as a coherent framework. The Swedish government work has established a national delegation for the implementation of 2030 Agenda. International development cooperation is an important tool to support developing countries in the implementation of the 2030 Agenda, but the efforts towards sustainable development and poverty eradication cannot be a task only for the development policy and development actors. It requires involvement of a broad range of actors and efforts within and across all policy areas, including development cooperation, trade, foreign relations, climate, environment, and migration policies, and so on. Sweden emphasizes the importance of good multilateral donorship and is well advanced in many areas and is a leading voice, I would say, in the international efforts towards more sustainable development. In this respect, dialogue with member states and work throughout the UN system, the European Union, OECD, multilateral development banks, and other international organizations will be crucial. The seat in the UN Security Council will also provide a platform for Sweden to work for international peace and security. The Paris Agreement is an important milestone in the fight against climate change. Climate change is the defining issue of our time and a key priority to the Swedish government. With my fellow foreign ministers within the European Union, I am, and many Swedish embassies are, engaged in climate diplomacy to follow up and spur implementation of the agreement. And Sweden will also, together with Fiji, co-host a high-level UN conference on oceans, which will take place in New York in June 2017. So, ladies and gentlemen, as the world's first feminist government and as a strong supporter of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, it is crucial to see the gendered effects of conflict, poverty, and scarcity of basic resources such as water. Gender mainstreaming is a strategic approach for achieving gender equality and women's empowerment at all levels of development. And it is time to turn the political commitments into real action, moving from words to deeds. And I would like to end with a poem by one of our more well-known poets, Karin Boye. And it is actually a poem about water. It's called The Spring Water. A spring water is justice, clear and colorless, a scarce perceptible and strange taste it has. But when wine is to be had, such drink is so poor, nothing but water is the spring, yet I yearn for it there. Nothing but water is justice, nothing much to attain, too close, too hard to love, a bitter drink to drain. Lord, give me justice, give my soul its peer. Lord, give me water, colorless and clear. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Minister. It's clear that you have a very strong commitment for equality, and learned from your speech that you are also very committed to the sake of water and sanitation. So how do you see, would you like to dwell a little bit more on an example on its importance for women and girls, and also perhaps for sustainability?
Well, I think to women and girls around the world, access to water and sanitation is a matter of both dignity, health, and I would say time. I found out that there are staggering figures. It's estimated that more than 20% of girls in Sierra Leone miss school during their periods. In Nepal and Afghanistan, 30%. And there are also estimates that indicate that almost a quarter of Indian girls drop out of school when they reach puberty. And the ones that remain in school miss on average 5 days a month or 50 days a year. So of course this means that you will have less of a chance to develop, to help in the economy, to get a proper education, and it will hurt the whole economy and the whole society. And I think often people feel a bit shameful to discuss openly what happens during menstruation for girls, or access to sanitation, or discuss toilets. And I'm sure that Jan Eliasson will say more about this. He knows these issues very well. But we have to discuss this, to give also women and girls a better life. And women and girls spend so many hours fetching water. And it means that also it will not give them time to maybe establish a garden or engage in other activities in society, develop their lives and their personal economy, but also the economy of their societies and their villages. And I think this has to be made visible, and it has to be discussed, and how we can help each other. And I think men, I'm hoping to see more men fetch water, or even and also get firewood. I think that would change things, start to change things. I know it is happening here and there, but of course it is also a matter of building the facilities necessary to enable all of this, and make the investments, and to realize that men and women have to help each other in making sure that also women can contribute. I also wanted to tell you about the study in Bangladesh when it comes to health, how it impacts women's health. A study in Bangladesh showed that 60% of female workers in a factory there, they used rags from the factory floor as menstrual pads. And this resulted in infections that caused 73% of the women workforce to miss work for an average of 6 days a month. And an intervention to change this saw absenteeism drop to 3%, resulting in, of course, significant economic gains for both workers and the factory owner. And if this scenario can be reproduced in farms, factories, homes, offices, and other workplaces around the world, major socioeconomic benefits will be gained that also contributes to the achievement of other sustainable development goals. And again, it's a matter of accepting that this is part of women's and girls' lives, and also be able to speak about it and deal with it openly, make it a visible problem that you want to face and want to do something about.
Thank you very much. Thank you for providing us with such concrete examples.